Hello everyone, it's Lennon. I have been researching the hell out of amulets and talismans, and it's been so fascinating because there's so many from different cultures, different religions, that are present. I mean, there's just so many. And I was doing some research. What started out as research into the difference between an amulet and a talisman, there's not that big of a difference. Okay, I'm actually wearing. It's not actually one of my amulets, but I guess you could say spiritual jewelry. It's like this metal, and it's got this weird sound. It's just so beautiful. Well, I was researching the difference between amulet and talisman. Now, the main difference was how they're made. So, like, how they're formed. What materials did they, were used. Like, for instance, in how they were formed, it could be forged, it could be glued together, it could be stitched together like a scapulet, and which, when I was researching the Catholic scapulet, I think it's called a scapulet or a scapulature, it's like two pieces of cloth that are stitched together, and it's like, I don't know, I think it depicts Michael, or the Archangel Michael. Anyway, I found that so fascinating, like this cloth necklace that you wear, and it's supposed to symbolize like I think it symbolizes like your purity with God, or your purity in faith, maybe. I think it's in your faith. Anyways, the point is, and of course it's going to get sunny. It's been overcast all day. So according to the article this one article that I was reading, amulets relate to protection. So they are for protection. They are to protect you. And the example that I used, wrote down, was like a dried scorpion would protect you from scorpion bites. Pretty duh, right? Pretty duh. That it's used, that amulets, they utilize the actual symbols that you would need protection from. And gradually over time, what happened was people started putting magical properties into the amulets that would intensify its protective properties, effectively turning them into talismans. So I thought that was really cool, but it's all on how they're made and what they're made of is the real difference. So anyways, for an amulet, it's just usually a natural thing. Stones, feathers, bones. What else did I write? Wood, shells. Something that you find out in nature could be an amulet. And people would pick these up, and with no magic, with like not putting any magic in them, they were just said to, you just wear them like hagstones. I know those are pretty popular, right? I would love to find a hagstone someday. You just pluck these things out of nature and then use those in protection. Usually on the person somewhere. So mostly I think that what comes to mind is like the necklace. So you use them as a necklace, or maybe a clip on a scarf, or a brooch, or you just carry it around with you like in a pocket, right? I have some pieces of driftwood that I've got like sitting in certain sacred spaces in the house that feel very much like that. Like something I've plucked out of nature that I didn't hurt nature for. Okay, I'll say that. That drew my eye. And it does feel like something sacred. So that would be an amulet. But I didn't have to put anything into this object for it to just be sacred to me. It just is, because of its natural property. The natural property of driftwood, right? But like I said, gradually over time, people started realizing that they could put seemingly good magic, I'll say. I don't like that. I don't like to use good and bad in when we're talking about magic, but seemingly good things that have magic, or that seemingly had magic, into objects would make them talismans. So people would put the tetragrammaton, names of God, names of angels, scriptures, like verses, like Bible verses, Quran verses, verses from sacred texts. So I thought that was pretty fascinating, because it's like in witchcraft for me, okay? I use bibliomancy a lot in my witchcraft. And I thought that there are certain sacred texts that I write down. I write down in really good font, calligraphy, whatever you want to call it. I draw it out, the quote or whatever, the really nice that I like, and paste it into my book of shadows, right? That's kind of like the same thing. It's kind of like a talisman sitting there in my book. And I thought that there could be something to be done with that, is that we could somehow use our magical sacred texts, the ones that we use and we go to for our magic practice, and make a talisman out of it. And by reading it and by going back to it, this page in our Book of Shadows that has this quote, we're effectively putting more energy into it. And effectively that means that that makes it a talisman. Now, a talisman in and of itself, planes, are a little bit more specific, okay, than amulets. Now, like I said, an amulet is for protection, but it's only based on its natural properties. And then once we put magic into it, it kind of turns it into a talisman. But talismans in and of themselves are a little bit more specific in their making, right? You have to make them out of specific materials. You have to make them during certain magical times astrologically, like something that would be prevalent to what you're using the talisman for. Like a sacred shrine, or something that's to do with communication, and that's what the talisman's for. So you use a day where Mercury comes back from retrograde or something like that. I'm just saying, I'm guessing. I don't know anything really about astrology. There's a lot of emphasis in the magical properties that you can put into a talisman, but really it's inside you realizing that man is the mage, that man is the magical practitioner that has the power to put their power into an object. Bam, right there, you realizing that and doing the work makes that makes that whatever it is, that inanimate object that you want to put a talisman as a talisman. You just have to realize that you have the power to plug your magic into it, and then do that, and then bam, works for you. And I thought about this too. I thought about the act of self-doubt. Like, if you're doubting something in your life and you want to make a talisman for it, don't make the talisman, because again, we're going, it has to be like real specific. Don't form and forge the talisman on a day where that seems to be really, really low. Take courage, for example. If you're on a day where you're really fearful, I don't know what is happening, really fearful, right? Then I wouldn't use that day. I would use a day where you have felt like your courage was at a high percentage. You used 90% of your courage. You walked across that rope bridge and made it to the other side. And that made you feel courageous. Then I would harness that. I would make the talisman on those days where you feel the most courageous. And then it's imbibed with more of your specific magic. And I think that you have to think about your self-doubts. You have to think about those areas of your life. You're like, oh, I wish I had more of this. But if you use it at a time of low courage, then it's like, how much of that courageous energy of yours are you actually putting into that talisman if you don't have any, if you're like at 1%? And I was looking up different amulets and talismans from history. Like, if we think of some of the famous ones that we can think of, I think of Egypt. I think of Egypt because they use so many. Like, there was just so many famous ones. I think I wrote down that the Eye of Horus is probably the most famous amulet that we know of in the Egyptian pantheon. Is this Eye of Horus was this I believe that this was a talisman. It calls it an amulet, but it was a talisman because it was forged from metal, from Thoth, okay, given to Horus to replace the eye that Horus lost in battle with Seth, okay? So it's almost like Thoth had to have put some sort of magical properties, and because he was the god of writing anyway, he would have probably used some of that magic to, as a way, kind of like Odin a little bit, kind of like to replace that eye, to show Horus that you don't have to actually have both eyes, and by this talisman will constantly have you realize that you still have one eye, to be grateful for this one eye that you still have, and to not mourn, keep mourning the loss of your other eye in a place where you're just dreading and you're just living in the past and you're not living in the future. So I think there was a lot of hidden messages in the Eye of Horus itself as this gift from Thoth. So that's the most famous one. But then there's a lot of amulets that are just used, like pregnant women would use them, and they would sometimes have a depiction of a god or the goddess of childbirth. And then after the birth would take place, they would switch the amulet for a god of like protection of children, because the child would have been born then. Not so much the goddess of childbirth, you don't need her anymore. She's already done her work, So those are some from Egypt, and then going down and back in time, we're coming up the timeline here. We got the Romans, right? We got the Romans, and it says amulets were worn to give the wearer a little oomph, a little power from the gods, right? They were mostly used as like good luck charms, I believe. Kind of like the Celts, they used the four-leaf clover for good luck. That's an amulet. It's a naturally occurring thing that means good luck. I have a couple of four-leaf clovers that I've collected over the years that I've put in like contact paper and made bookmarks out of, and those are talismans, or they're amulets, because I haven't put any magic in them. We go into like East Asia, I guess you could say. It's like Palestine, Syria, Mesopotamia, those countries and those surrounding them. Their amulets were actually sheets of metal, and what they did was they rolled up their sheets of metal and wore those metal scrolls around their necks. And usually they would have a little needle hanging there, or some variation, but they would always have the tetragrammaton written on them. So found that fascinating too. And in China, we had the Taoists, who, for their amulets, it was more so sacred calligraphy. They used their handwriting for amulets, for amulet making, I guess you could say, is the emphasis there on the amulets would be in their sacred calligraphy. And these pieces of paper with the sacred calligraphy would be put into bags hung around the neck. Again, around the neck. And then we have all the Abrahamic religions, okay? Not all of them, I haven't listed all of them, but some of the more well-known. So we've got Judaism, and there's, I guess the famous ones would have names or texts on them from Judaism. The Star of David is probably the most well-known amulet of Judaism, okay? Usually worn around the neck. And then, of course, we have Christianity, the cross. Any type of devotional paraphernalia. Like I said, the scapulet would probably be one of them. A rosary, some kind of medal, like a medal medallion. Think of those little saints, those saint necklaces. Those are amulets. And sometimes they had scriptures on them. Like I said before, sometimes they were like textual in nature. So it's all on what the specific church in Christianity is doing, or utilizing. And then we have Islam. Now I wrote some amulets are used, but sometimes it was believed that they are idolatry. So there are some people that believe in the power of amulets and the powers they have of protection, but then there's a lot of percentage that don't believe in that. They think that it's idolatry, and they won't utilize them. So the famous one in the Islamic faith would be the Hamza, right? Or the hand of Fatima, the hand of Miriam. I think it's either one of those. And then we have Buddhists. We have Tibetan Buddhists and we have Thailand Buddhists. And with Tibetan Buddhists, they used many amulets, talismans, and ritual tools, like the bell, right? Lots, again, with the scrolls and textual amulets. And then in Thailand, it's different scrolls and tablets. But what was really interesting about the Thailand Buddhists is that they have necromantic scrolls. Scrolls that are actually made from a part of the body, like skin, bones, teeth, hair, or something, that they've plucked from a deceased body that died in unnatural ways, to be able to raise them from the dead, to be able to, change the way in which they died. So if they died in some kind of unnatural way, then these Thailand Buddhists would raise these people back from the dead and give them a more peaceful death, which I found fucking fascinating. But this page did go on to say that the Buddhists themselves have so many that there would be no way to name them all. Like, people have devoted their lives to studying all their amulets. So now, etymologically, the word amulet comes from amultium, which means an object that protects. And then the word talisman comes from French, which comes from Arabic, which then comes from Greek, talisma. And then that word in and of itself means completion of a religious rite. And then the quote, the word is turned into a verb, which means I complete and perform a rite. So the talisman is about, like, I think of like that probably back in the day would have been a medal. Think of the Greek games, like even the Eleusinian mysteries, like something you would have get some kind of token for completing a rite. And that's probably where talismans came from, is that you had these pieces, these really ornate pieces of things that you hang around your neck. It probably derived from that. It probably derived from these trophies of some kind, these medals that you win, that you earn. So I think that was fascinating. And then, of course, amulets are just these natural things that you find that seem sacred to you, or seem sacred to you in terms of a culture, or in terms of a religion, that you would collect in terms of protection. Anyway, I found all this fascinating. I'm sorry about all the freaking noise. But I had to get all this out because this has been so enlightening to research these amulets and talismans. And I find myself wanting to go find some hagstones and some arrowheads, because there's a lot of them here where I live, in creek beds. Like, when you go and the creeks are low, we get like notifications here when the creeks are low, and you go and dig up arrowheads, which is like really fun to go on these sort of like quests for an arrowhead. So arrowheads and pretty stones, like, it doesn't have to be necessarily a hagstone, but those would be cool. Crystals, dig for crystals. Look for wood that catches your eye, like I did with the driftwood. Feathers, collecting feathers. I tend to collect feathers. I don't have a lot of them. Bones. I have this bag of bones. My parents have a pretty big plot of land, and we found a dead deer on the property, but it was completely de-skinned, de-muscled, de-everything. It was only bones. And according to the decomposition process of the bones, they'd been there for like 3 years in like the back acre of their land, which they never really ventured to. So it's been there decomposing for about 3 years. So I was able to bring the bones of that dead deer home, and I was able to put my fingers, I remember putting my fingers into the earth, like right where the bones were buried and just thanking the earth, because it just felt like the bones were for me, and like it was a gift. And so I had to offer something back to the earth for that, which I did. I had like a little, you know, it was like a funeral really for the deer, and, you know, thinking on, like, really meditating on the cycles of life, circle of life, and thinking, like I said, thinking the earth, then coming home, cleaning all the bones. And it's been really cool to figure out how to use all their little bones for necklaces and certain wind chime projects that I'm going to do. So don't be coming up on Lennon's house, because you'll know a fucking witch lives here when I got bones hanging out of the damn trees. Okay? Anyway, let me know what you think of amulets and talismans. Do you have any? I want to know. Much love, people.